It's time now for the sponsor perspective portion of the program. Joining me now is Brian Hendricks, Vice President of Policy and Government Relations at Nokia. A quick note before we start: while I'm conducting this interview and the questions are really mine, this portion of the program shouldn't be considered editorial nature. Brian, I sort of feel like I've got this big question for you. What about 20 years from now, when the Brian and Steve show, we're both old codgers looking back at the Great Rebuild? Was it a great rebuild or was it a whimper? What was achieved in this moment, looking back, and what are the stakes of this moment?
Well, you always start me out with the big question, and I'm happy to answer it. But first, let me say congratulations on facilitating yet another really critical dialogue. I would say we have spent a lot of time in the last 6 to 9 months talking about the infrastructure package that was passed by Congress and what it ultimately means in terms of connecting the unconnected. But what's been missing from the conversation is to recognize the enormity of the opportunity that exists here. And by that, I mean connecting people and things is critically important, but we haven't talked a lot about what that will translate to. And there's also simultaneously a lot of discussion about sustainability. I'll call that sustainability with a small s, which is around the impact and the cumulative impact of individual company efforts. And Nokia is no exception in terms of trying to drive greener business practices. But to build a more sustainable, livable, equitable-based society, you need to recognize that more and more of the activities of daily life are going to become digitalized. Healthcare, which you just heard from Dr. Lee, education, precision agriculture, intelligent manufacturing, things that we have talked about, frankly, when you and I get together many, many times. And the network, and a highly capable network being available ubiquitously to our citizens and to our institutions, is the backbone for that, for delivering and improving upon the quality of rural healthcare, which I hope we'll get a chance to talk about specifically, because community hospitals have been disappearing from America. Specialists are hard to come by. You have an aging population that is not seeing healthcare innovations. And the power of the network, a highly capable network, to be able to link communities to academic centers, has a real potential to improve the quality of diagnostic healthcare and the way we drive it out. That's a part of a livable, equitable society. Same with education. So it's not just about connecting people and things. It's about fundamentally transforming our society into one which is more sustainable from a green perspective, from a livability perspective, and from an equity perspective. So if in 20 years, Steve, you and I are having a conversation about this just being about making connections, and we didn't lead to the transformations in these sectors that I mentioned, it will be an enormous missed opportunity.
Well, let me ask you, Brian, I remember around 1998, 1999, the Markle Foundation actually funded studies to try and look at how, the home would be different, how students might be able to get on the internet, how law and legal law offices would change. I mean, in agriculture you would have things. And the truth is that there was this sense that you had to teach and educate citizens on how the internet might impact them. Now we're way beyond that. You can hardly remember that time. But as we look forward, and just laying out the kinds of things you talked about, increase in productivity outputs, getting greater sustainability. Why? Because conservation is going to be baked in. I guess what are does gravity get us there naturally? Are we just going to flow there? Or do we actually have to proactively do things, make certain kinds of investments, get partnerships right? Because I always worry that the real risk here is that we don't take seriously enough the challenge and don't have a good playbook on how to get there. So what is the playbook we have to get where we need to go?
Well, I'd say first, taking a look backwards, as you mentioned, we've always talked about making sure that digital literacy and an understanding about how connectivity can benefit you has always been an important part of the adoption side of the equation in terms of getting broadband connection out there. It's still, by the way, a foundational piece of what we're doing. There was a great deal of money put forward in the infrastructure law for that. The FCC has been extremely active in this respect because people still need to see and understand the ways in which their lives can be enriched with that connection. Those connections obviously also need to be affordable. But I think in the past, we've talked about these aspirationally as if someday the networks may be capable of doing this and you need to be prepared for it. We're here. We actually have the capability to deliver really high speed, really low latency connectivity of the kind that can actually facilitate the things that we spoke about 10 years ago being aspirational, things that will impact in precision agriculture, things that using big data science to drive some of the decision making that will lead to more sustainable farming. These things are real and they are possible. So I think we need to expand the amount of investment that we make in bringing those use cases to life for people to see. We need those kinds of investments to be happening. We need innovation beds to deliver on that. We need the application community to actually take advantage of the connectivity, to understand the needs of those verticals like healthcare, to develop the applications that will run on the networks that will really help them understand the ways in which that connectivity can transform what they are doing and make it real, not aspirational, but real today. And so I think the biggest partnership needs to be between industry and government to figure out how do we take the money, how do we take the policies that we have been pursuing and tailor them on adoption, on digital literacy, on speeding up the connections, leaving no areas behind. How do we get the demonstrations? How do we bring the application community together with the network providers to actually accelerate those use cases and those demonstrations so that we will see people having the desire to execute on implementing enterprise networks, municipal networks, and not just the connectivity to the home. That's clearly a big part of it. We need to get our institutions online as well.
Brian, I don't know if you were out at South by Southwest in Austin these last few days, but I was there, and the kind of anticipating our discussion, I began thinking about what are these young next generation people, how the wired child out there, what are they doing, how are they looking at that, and I have to say that the coolest places were those that had AR, VR headsets, and you had people going into collective clusters and were able to deal with each other in entirely new environments. And I'm obviously going to talk to someone the VR lady, Dr. Angelina Dayton, just after this. But it began making me think about as we used to talk about a digital divide, is there an AR VR divide? Is there a virtual reality divide that we have in our society, where those who have access to it for really constructive purposes like upskilling or finding new experiences are going to be propelled forward in ways than those folks who aren't. I'm going to get mine. I'm going to become a big advocate and solve my generational ignorance problem and get out there and do that. But I'm just wondering whether or not we need to take more seriously the fact that those who are being wired into these new opportunities, these new platforms, are having their brains stretched, their experiences widened. They're going to be more nimble in so many different ways, and what the consequences are of not making that something that a broad swath of people can experience.
Yeah, I'm extremely pleased that you're talking to Dr. Dayton. She's brilliant, and I think she makes a very compelling, actually influenced me certainly, to think about the fact that the capability to upskill and reskill the workforce in many parts of the country, which were the hardest hit by the loss of manufacturing, the loss of industry, those also tend to overlap with the areas with the worst connectivity story. And if you realize that you don't have access to a trade school or a college, either from an affordability or a demographic perspective in an area that has been so impacted, the ability to learn skills through other means that can be operationalized and help put those individuals back in the workforce becomes exceedingly important. AR and VR can be a very powerful tool for that purpose because you can go well beyond the ability to communicate information that just a standard video course, for example, could. You can actually get hands-on learning, and as the networks become even more capable, you're talking about the ability to have haptic feedback that can help guide people who are learning a skilled trade. But you got to have a network in place and the connectivity in place that is capable of supporting those activities. And you'll find, particularly in the areas around tribes and rural communities, the connectivity is not sufficient. You really do need this high-powered network and the capability. And I think it brings alive possibilities when you listen to Dr. Dayton to look at what the Department of Labor does, for example. We don't just give economic adjustment assistance anymore to an impacted area. You bring a suite of services and capabilities, including devices and the ability with high-powered networks to access some of these tools to quickly reskill and upskill and move back into the workforce. And we're missing out on that opportunity. Where you live shouldn't be a variable that determines whether or not you have access to something which is real and available today. So I think it would be a missed opportunity, and we would be seeing benefits for people who live in places that the networks can support that, who would miss out on it in areas where they can't get the requisite connectivity.
Brian, I don't know if you remember that NPR show, The Car Guys. Do you remember that show?
I do.
I think maybe we could be the 5G guys, or maybe we could be the connectivity guys and take a show to them together. What do you say?
I think so. That would be a very, very interesting exercise.
Well, folks, I don't know how to find it on the web. It's somewhere out there, but I always enjoy my conversation with Brian Hendricks, who's Vice President of Policy and Government Relations at Nokia. They're great conversations, not because of me, but because of him. They're out there in a number of forums we've done together, and I just really want to appreciate the seriousness. You bring your A game to these discussions and make it, give people on-ramps to understand what the stakes are. So thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks for having us, Steve.